Meanwhile, Islamist insurgents appear to be gaining ground in Iraq. In the past 24 hours, a string of car bomb blasts killed at least 50 people. RT International correspondent Lucy Kafanoff is on the ground in Erbil, Iraq, to tell us what she's seeing. Hi, Lucy. So, over 50 people dead. Do you feel safe where you are?
Well, Liz, the area where I'm actually located is in the autonomous region, semi-autonomous region of Iraqi Kurdistan. It's probably the only area in Iraq that has really benefited and seen growth and improvement since the invasion. Much of the country, unfortunately, remains mired in strife, sectarian divisions, as well as other political and human problems. The attacks in Baghdad today are quite symbolic in the sense that Iraq, in many ways, has seemed to close the painful chapter of the past 10 years, much the same way that it began. Explosions over Baghdad. We have seen massive losses all across the country. There has been reports of sectarian strife in almost every place you go. And while I feel safe here, I certainly do. We did spend most of the day in the city of Kirkuk. Now, this city is a very good sort of microcosm of Iraq as a whole. There's all different types of sectarian and ethnic populations there. They have lived largely in peace for many years, but unfortunately, they're seeing an uptick and surge in violence as well. And where we went, I mean, it did feel quite dangerous, not because of the people, but because of the growth and the potential of terrorist attacks. And in fact, some of the forces that we were with who had escorted us for safety had said that there were two explosions, small explosions in the city of Kirkuk, which really shows that almost no place that you go in Iraq, except for Kurdistan at the moment, is quite safe.
Now, can you describe, I know you just mentioned you were traveling around some of these other areas of Iraq, what the conditions are like there. Does it still look like a war zone?
You know, it's interesting. Having not been to Iraq before, you think Iraq war, it must be a terrible situation of conflict. And while people do live with daily strife, it's quite fascinating to see the resilience of Iraqis, the way that they've been able to move on despite the oppressive conditions that have taken place, both from the invasion, the occupation, and the subsequent sectarian strife. Even in the city of Kirkuk, as we were driving by, we saw school children walking out, people walking around, people sitting in cafes, and talking to some of my colleagues who were in Baghdad. It's the same sort of situation. And while it is an optimistic situation, it shows that perhaps Iraqis are able to deal and move on beyond the circumstances that have been handed to them. It also indicates perhaps a normalization of the levels of violence, something that is quite unfortunate to see.
Yeah, you described the resilience of the people there. How would you describe their mindset? Would you say that they're more hopeful that things are going to change and things are going to get better, or more hopeless that change will happen today as opposed to their mindset 10 years ago?
I think almost every Iraqi that you speak to, or at least ones we've spoken to, do hope that things will change, but very few are optimistic that this will happen in the immediate future. Iraq in the immediate moment is dealing with numerous political problems. There's tension on the ground between the Sunni populations and the Shia-led government. There's also tensions between Baghdad and the disputed region here near the Kurdistan area. There's conflict over oil deals, frustration with the political system, accusations of corruption and strife, and of course the daily insurgency, the attacks that of course have gone down significantly since the height of the war that still continue, as evidenced by the blast in Baghdad. And so I think many Iraqis that you speak to will say, you know what, yes, we're free, Saddam Hussein is gone, but at what cost? Is it worth it to have these daily attacks, this violence? One man that we spoke to in the city of Kirkuk today said, yes, I'm free to go out of my house today. The question is whether I will return alive. And I think that says quite a lot about the situation that Iraq faces today.
Yeah, I mean, when President Bush announced that we would invade Iraq, one of the reasons, justification, was to liberate the people there. But, I mean, 10 years later, do you think people there feel any safer?
I think that unfortunately people don't feel much safer. People feel that they're dealing with a different set of problems. They've exchanged, this is one comment that I've heard, is we've exchanged one yoke of oppression for another one. They're not necessarily happy with the direction that the government is taking. They're not necessarily happy with the services and the employment situation. Nearly 40% of all Iraqi adults at the moment don't have a job. A quarter of the families live below the World Bank's poverty line. These are statistics that aren't much better than what we saw under the crippling UN sanctions of the 1990s. And so while I think everyone here wants to see the country move forward, there is a lot of pessimism, there is a lot of disappointment in where Iraq is 10 years later. And not to mention the fact that almost every single person in this country has lost somebody they loved. It's a nation that is moving on, but is completely traumatized and scarred by 10 years of bloodshed, war, and sectarian strife. For Iraq, the future really remains uncertain at the moment.
Lucy, thanks so much for your reporting there, and stay safe. That was RT International correspondent Lucy Kafanov on the ground in Erbil, Iraq.